Hi, Hamilton. Very good to be here with you, finally. I think just to jump right in, to introduce yourself for people who don't know you, if you could just share the story of your calling and how you came to be who and what you are.
Sure. My name is Hamilton Souther, and 20 plus years ago, I had a spontaneous awakening, and the calling sent me down to the Amazon to ultimately study Amazonian plant medicine with a focus on ayahuasca. And I went through a traditional apprenticeship from 2002 to 2008 and 9, and I continued on that journey. Along that way, I founded Blue Morpho, which was really the first Amazonian plant medicine center focused on the healing arts and sharing the healing arts with the rest of the world. And we helped kick off the neo-shamanic revolution and the psychedelic renaissance, and really have supported the idea of consciousness awakening and human optimization and healing through plant medicines for the last 20 years.
Awesome. So how did you get onto that path? You know, I've heard some podcasts where you talk about how you were studying anthropology, I think, and you were like, you know, fully a part of Western civilization. And then to go from there to becoming who you are now, one of the world's most well-renowned shamans living in, you know, the jungle. How can you map that territory for us?
Yeah, I studied anthropology in the university. It seems like a long time ago now. I graduated in 2000. And I was really fascinated by culture and also history, the historic and paleoanthropology, but also cultural anthropology. So I kind of had this, vast idea of the timeline, and then also the living cultures that were still practicing a more traditional way of life. And a year after I graduated from the university, I had my own awakening, and it sent me into plant medicine and ultimately shamanism. So the transition has a kind of bridge because, I had studied about these cultures, but I hadn't actually participated in them. And the opportunity to participate in them crossed at that time a barrier in science between the observer and the participant. And in anthropology, you couldn't continue the study of anthropology as a participant. And I understood that the plant medicine experience required the participation to actually understand and see what was going on. And so I actually decided to participate, and in doing so, left behind the anthropology and became really my own subject of study. And so I studied my own experiences like an anthropologist while I was going through the traditional apprenticeship and all of the rigors and sort of difficulties that are part of that.
And so another thing I heard on a podcast with you was that you were going through a difficult time or something, and you had a dream, I think, or there was a moment when you called out to spirit, I think encouraged by your mom. Let me know if I'm getting this wrong. And then you had a dream. Yeah. You had a dream and ended up basically following that dream, and you met some shamans in the jungle, and I think the story is that they were waiting for you for like 15 years or something like that, which is just crazy. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. At that period of time, I was looking for direction in my life, and it was a pretty dark time. I ultimately went to my mom, kind of like, well, what's this? You made me. So what's this all about? And she said, well, if you don't want your life, give it to spirit, And I didn't believe in that concept. Now I understand that spirit ultimately is, for me, the greater energy of this whole place. It's not just the way that we're taught in school. It's the life is not just driven by the materialist reductionist model. There's actually a lot more going on. And so to me, that's what spirit refers to. It's not the idea of ghosts walking around, although I know people who see things like that, and I've had experiences like that myself. But the idea was give your life to spirit, like to the great energy of this whole universe. So I did that, and what happened ultimately was this awakening. And in the awakening, I had a very lucid dream experience where I had complete recall of the experience itself, but in it, I met what other people called spirits. And it was very clear to me that they existed, that they were part of some realm that I did not understand and had really no connection with at that time. I was building that connection. And after that experience, I couldn't say that spirits didn't exist. I couldn't deny it anymore. I couldn't have a denial mentality about the greater spiritual world. And so in that moment, I awakened to it, and it was now part of my life. And it was kind of a watershed moment. I realized I had to either embrace it or I had an inner conflict inside me. And so I really embraced that and followed it. And what came from that then was a series of really like a learning of techniques about how to go into trance and how to access these altered states of consciousness, and in them gain real information, guidance, and direction, and then use that information and direction to, travel. In this case, I went down to Peru, and I was seeking this apprenticeship. I had been told in vision that I would find an apprenticeship and that I would be trained in the traditional arts. And so I went on the journey, and I ultimately found a lineage of healers, real mystics of the forest. And I met Julio Llerena Pinedo, who ended up becoming the maestro who accepted me into their lineage. And it turned out many years later, to finish the question of your story, we were filming a documentary film, and one of the teachers that I was with just spoke into the camera that they had had visions for over 10 years before I arrived. And at that point, it had already passed about 6 or 7 years, so 17 years before that moment. And he had said that they had had visions of somebody looking just like me that was going to come into their area of the forest, and that they were going to accept him and train him. And, they cut the interview, and camera crew went away, and I went back over to the guy, and I said to him, like, you never told me that, And he said, well, today was the day that you were going to learn about it. So, it turned out then from that point we sat down and talked, but they had in their ayahuasca visions, visions of me coming, and then after that, great things changing for them.
Wow. That's a really crazy story. Really beautiful. I feel like that's something that a lot of people probably dream of, like a lot of people think that they want, because it seems like having an experience like that just makes the path so clear, like just such clear direction. And I think that for most people, it's a little less clear, a little less perhaps like instructive like that. And so if we want to hone in on specifically the plant medicine path and people who feel a kind of calling, I don't think it's always, like I say, as clear as yours. Where you have a dream, or you have a series of dreams and visions that say you need to go to this place. It seems that actually as you progress, the communication does get clearer. But I think for a lot of people, they're not sure. There's this feeling of like wanting to serve and wanting to give people what you've received in the way that you've received it. But then there's also like there's something that feels more true. And this, I think, is what people refer to when they say the calling. And so there's a lot of people who, will have like a mushroom experience, and then they want to become a mushroom shaman, for example. But then I think there's also a lot of people, specifically now, like with the psychedelic renaissance, if we say that the plants have an agenda, it would make a lot of sense that more people are being born with some kind of calling, or the plants are calling us in a way. So I think the question that I'm trying to bring out of this is like, how do we differentiate for someone who's not sure if they are feeling called in this direction, but they do feel like they might be, how can they discern between what's real and what might be coming from a place of ego? Yeah.
Well, ego's part of the calling. There isn't an ego-free calling. And I think that that's an important distinction to make. In the spiritual kind of jargon, there's this idea of moving beyond the ego and ego death. But there isn't really a death of the ego. There's a transcendence of the negative expressions of ego. And so you have to accept the fact that there might be part of you that likes the idea of being called, or that there's a part of you that wants that, especially if that's going to be part of your destiny and part of your life path. So first, I think it's just okay that you have that. Fundamentally, if you accept a calling, whether you make it up or not, you have to fulfill the calling. So you have to fulfill that. And there's a training that goes through that. I think the hardest thing for people to get into their mind is that the calling is the easy part. The easy part is the calling. It's a desire. It comes from something that feels like beyond you. That's very easy to experience in psychedelic ceremonies. The plants themselves create an awareness of what's beyond you. If you have the desire to learn, if you have the desire to serve, if you want to be part of a solution, that already is a calling. Where did that desire come from? Where did that desire to even engage with the plants in the first place come from? If the plants, lots of people have these experiences and they don't come away from the experiences saying, wow, I want to learn that. They're kind of like, hey, that was a neat thing to do. I'm going to go back to whatever. Go back to finance, go back to engineering, go back to math, go back to, a service job, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But there are some people who have that experience and they come away from it so impacted, so changed, so with such a resonant frequency of that experience within them that they know that there's something greater going on. I think that's the beginning of the calling already. Now, there are a lot of people that will fulfill the calling. There are a lot of people that won't. Right? So if you're going to be a person who fulfills the calling, you start. It's as simple as that. You start to engage with the plants more. You start to seek it out. You start to go on the journey of that calling. Like, my path was clear, but the path also wasn't defined in a real linear way for me. It was go to Peru. It's a big country. There's a lot going on there. It was do journeys without any kind of psychedelics. It was do meditative trances and get information on where to go next, and then have to trust that and actually go. So these callings are I don't know, they can be romanticized, but in reality, it's a direction for you. And if you don't have direction, I think it's an incredible thing, because direction is what makes us feel like we have purpose. And it's what makes us feel like there's something greater than us that we're a part of that is in some ways special. But then you have to embrace it, and then you have to go find somebody who will actually teach you. There are very few formal places to be able to go learn this at this point in time. And the traditional lineages, in most cases, are cut off from Westerners or foreigners simply because they've protected their knowledge over generations of different kinds of Western conquest. And so there are very, very few places. So you have to go on the journey, and then you have to find someone who will teach you. And then when you find someone who will teach you, then you have to go through the process of really learning. And that's the part that I really want to focus on. The training process to be a true practitioner is extensive. It could be much harder than Western education. It could be much harder than high school or secondary school, and then university, and then higher education, like postgraduate work. It could take longer. Ayahuasca apprenticeships can often take over 10 to 15 years, and you live it every day. So there's a need to understand that the calling is really to a complete life path that you have to embrace, that's going to have ups and downs on it. It's going to have times where you feel unbelievably lost. It'll have times where you feel found. It'll have opportunities for you to explore consciousness and to be able to share that with others, and in many ways be part of what will hopefully be improvement and solution. But it's not as cut and dry as it sounds. And so you have to embrace that original desire to go into the unknown and learn something that's beyond you. And then you have to find a teacher or a group of teachers. And then you have to actually go through the hard process of really learning, which could take a very long time. And in my case, I learned very quickly the original steps to actually, be allowed to practice on my own. And then I started an even longer process, which was to mature in that space. So I learned the basics really quickly, but then I had to spend years and years and years and years, over a decade, really maturing in the visionary space and getting really comfortable in that space. And so there's a tremendous process associated with it. It's okay to romanticize it. The calling starts with the desire, and then you have to really trust the universe. You have to really trust spirit. You have to really trust the plants and go on the journey that they provide for you. And in the trials and tribulations along that journey, you have to embrace them in the core of your soul, in the core of what makes you unique and special. And you have to go with that, regardless of how each stage of the way turns out. And through that process, you learn in the good, you learn in the bad, you learn in the times that are much more expansive, and also the times that contract and are much more difficult. And so that's really the calling. And if you have it, embrace it, because I think it's something that's very, very special. But your path will not look like anybody else's. And so you have to embrace that individuality. You have to embrace that unique expression between you and the plants. If it turns out that you focus in one kind of plant or another, that's great. If you end up working with lots of different plants, that's also great. The importance is that you embrace your unique path and you go on that journey and you accept the outcome of that journey and you really give it your best.
I do just want to make a note for people who are listening who do not feel called to the plant medicine path, that this conversation is entirely relevant to you too, I would say, because this is really about following your soul's calling. You know, it's not just about the plant medicine path. I specifically have curiosities around that, but I think that this advice can definitely be extended out to anyone, especially people who are feeling called to help, like you said, or to any kind of healing modality. I think that these kind of dynamics are going to be shared amongst all of those. So one thing I wanted to touch on was what you said early on, is this thing about how, you know, ego is a part of it. And I wanted to share something that came pretty clear for me recently. So yeah, I've always been very curious about working with plant medicines, and I've always felt like an affinity, and always been very interested in like what the facilitators are doing and that kind of thing. But I've never actually I've never given myself permission to acknowledge that, because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I speak to a lot of people who are elders in this space, and there seems to be like a big fear around people getting in it for the wrong reasons. And it also does seem like now that psychedelics are making their way into, you know, our culture, it is a very glamorous option, a very glamorous, you know, line of work. So, and I feel like I have noticed that there are people who are just like, you know, I want to be a shaman. And I've noticed in myself that there's almost like two parts to the journey, or to the calling, and they're not entirely separate. And I'm going to be really vulnerable by sharing this here. But I don't feel like I'm alone in this, that, there's one part of me that is exactly that. There's one part of me that just sees the shaman and they're like, whoa, you know, like that is crazy that someone can do that. That is so cool. I want to do that. I want to be that guy, you know, and that for me feels like it's largely coming from a place of lack, of like not being fully okay with being who I am, and instead wanting to be something else. And so that for me feels like the part of the calling that is coming more from a place of ego. And that's not to say that's bad and I should banish that, but I do feel like it's important that that is not what runs the show. That's not what leads me, because then there's this other part of the calling that after a recent ceremony, I felt like the difference between them was kind of made clear. And the other part is very simple, and it's very humble, and it's really just that I have this deep curiosity, and it's almost like I have no choice other than to continue feeding it and seek that which feeds it. And I want to learn more, and I do feel like I have some kind of natural capacity to do this. But the energy between those is very different. And so just being able to see that difference has allowed me to be like, okay, there is something true here. There is something real. There's also that other part of me that like just wants to be the guy or whatever, you know. But now that I can see that clearly, I feel like it's not controlling me, and I'm not afraid of that being the part that just totally takes the reins. And so now I can actually move forward knowing that that's there, you know? So that's been huge for me. It's just like walking in what feels like the true calling, you know, while acknowledging that I do also have this egoic, or like this part of me that's basically insecure, that feels like, oh, this is going to be the way that I finally like get that approval, you know?
I want to speak on that just a minute. You know, for people in all different aspects of their life, it's common, really common, to have that part, to want to be recognized and seen. You know, you got to understand that if you embrace this, and you embrace it as a life path, there will be people that like you and people that don't. There will be people who think you're great, and there will be people who also don't. There's the positives and the negatives in everything that we do. And there is a vulnerability and an insecurity when we're young in the space and learning. And that vulnerability will continue forever. And it's okay. It's okay to acknowledge it. It's okay to accept it. It's okay to move forward even though it's there. That's part of training. Part of the path to really learning how to facilitate or be a shaman, it requires going on a long journey with ego. And the most important thing is just be honest about it. Be honest about where you are with ego and what you're working on. The fact that you're aware of it and working on it at all is really amazing. And it shouldn't be something that stops you. There will be lots of different things that will try to stop you on your path, whether it's to learn shamanism and plant medicine or whether it's to learn anything. There's always these obstacles or challenges, and ego will always be part of it. And so acknowledging that is actually really important. And the humility that sits behind that is also very important. And so it's not a blocker. It's just something to be aware of and to continue to move through in each step of the journey. And recognize that it'll always be there as part of each step of the journey. The doubtful mind, the fearful mind, the insecure mind, those different aspects of self are just part of being alive. And it's okay, and embrace it.
I'm curious if this manifested or continues to manifest in any way for you. Like when you were starting on this path, did you have any version of that part coming up?
For sure. I was doubtful the whole time. It's a very common experience to have. The doubts and also the positive sides of it. There's a desire to succeed, a desire to share. There's also a kind of glamour associated with people, you know, bestowing upon you a tremendous amount of gratitude and thanks. I was very young when I, started, and I was also very young when I was promoted to being able to facilitate on my own and share the practices. That's why I think it's just a common part of this. Sometimes you overcompensate. Sometimes it is a detractor. Sometimes it's something that you have to work through. But ultimately, I think what really matters is that you embrace what is a talent of yours, and you embrace something that other people can benefit from. So if you have a talent and you have an affinity for anything, in this case we're talking about plant medicine, but if it were anything, embrace that talent and allow it to be ultimately affinity for other people to benefit from as well. And so, yeah, of course I experienced this. It's not something that you ever fully, quote, get over. You don't ever really transcend ego because ego is part of how you do the practices. I think when you transcend is the fear, the doubt, the inner concern, the nature of it that would kind of be an obstacle that would try to stop you from being able to continue moving forward. You ultimately recognize that you are part of the conduit of the energy. And so, yes, it's unique to you and you support through that, and other people would come to you and look for that kind of help or support. But you're also a conduit of something greater that we're all associated with. And I think that that something greater is a great equalizer for us. And it's also important to understand that ego is something that evolves over time. And so when you're in your 20s, your ego looks one way. In your 30s, it looks another way. In your 40s, it looks another way. And it constantly evolves. And so it's just something to be worked with and embraced and ultimately loved. And I think that that's the simplest way to address it.
Yeah, now I want to ask a few questions about working with ayahuasca, and it kind of bridges because at the moment I'm feeling like I want to attend more ceremonies, but I'm also trying to work out what's healthy, and it definitely is possible to become overly dependent on the medicine and to get stuck in, loops. You're not doing integration work and you're just going back for more and more. Was there a point in your journey when you were drinking like very regularly? And if so, how regularly? And how do you know when it's time to do that?
But when I was training, we would drink all the time, but within reason. There's a period of time where you drink and train, and then there's a period of time when you rest and you integrate. And so I pushed the envelope. I really did. I participated often in 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 ceremonies in a row, in a short period of time. So over 2 weeks, we could drink 12 straight nights or 9 straight nights. And the most I ever drank in a row was 40 nights. And so that's that was a significant period of training. We were specifically trying to transcend in philosophy a certain kind of duality. And so we were using ayahuasca to push that boundary and to try to grow in our philosophical practices and also medicine practices. I was looking for universal wisdom at that time and how to be able to relate to these dualistic paradoxes that don't sit well within universal wisdom. Like, if everything's love, how can the world look the way that it is where so many things don't look loving, like the poor slums and places where people really suffer? And so I was trying to relate to those, difficulties that humans and the rest of the world go through. So during that time, you train for a very specific period of time. You do ceremonies for that time, and then you move off and you integrate and you take time away from drinking ayahuasca. It's okay to use it in a, regular period of time. It's also okay to use it in a block of time and then take time off. We always did it in a block of time because just one ceremony or 2 ceremonies wasn't always enough to be able to kind of make the change or get the support and help that we needed for our next evolution of growth and development. And then on retreats themselves, we would be doing a week of healing work. So we would participate in 5 ceremonies. There were different organizations of those 5 ceremonies, like 2 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off, 1, or 3 on, 1 off, 2 on, etc. But there was always time to rest. There was always time to take a break, and there was always time to rest. There's a necessity for your body to process the alkaloids and the different chemicals that are in the plants themselves, and to ultimately remove them from your system. So you need to be very responsible with the medicines. It's okay to use them in a specific period of time. Your question around the crutch, like, am I using this for the right reasons? That has nothing to do with the ayahuasca itself. That has to do with you. And you have to be self-aware. You have to look into your soul. You need to listen to what your body's telling you. You need to recognize that idea of the crutch, or just wanting to be in that space. Escapism, or just leaving different aspects of kind of normal reality that might be distasteful. And so think about that. Keep all of that in mind when you look at the frequency that you're working with the different plants. Are you using them really to train? Are you using them to escape? Are you going into the ceremonies and really focusing and really doing the work and using it to progress? Or is it just a way to get away from normal daily life that could have different things about it that you don't really like? So I think that's really the differentiator. Keep that in mind, and then you can follow your own rhythm and your own path in the way that it works best for you. Fundamentally, there is too much, so you have to be aware of that, and you don't want to go into that place that's too much. But if you're training, you can drink, every week and every month, and then after a couple months, you take about 3 weeks to 6 weeks off. And then if you're just going as a person seeking healing, I don't think you should really participate more than a series of ceremonies, every 3 to 6 months, just simply so you have plenty of time to be able to address them. If they're strong ceremonies, I mean, there's obviously the difference between micro dosing and very small ceremonies versus having a much larger experience. The ceremonies that we were participated in would be considered, fully visionary ceremonies. There was nothing micro about them. So you needed to have plenty of time to be able to integrate. So for a week of ceremonies, you would need to integrate for months.
For most people, I think when they first make contact with ayahuasca, the intention is going to be for healing. And I'm curious to know what happens after that. Like when you are training, if you're not healing, what are you doing? Like, how is it teaching you?
Sure, you're learning skills. It's all about learning at that point. So there's philosophical learning, there's learning about the universe, there's learning about spirit, there's learning about energies. Then there's also learning about the different plants and how to use them, different kinds of healing techniques. In the ceremony itself, you learn how to hold the ceremony. You have to learn how to, there's a process that you have to go through which they call strengthening. So it's very much like an athlete. You learn how to hold more and more and more of the energies. And it can take quite a while. Like for me, the strengthening training took years. So it was one thing to hold a ceremony for a couple people, but it was another thing to hold a ceremony for 10 people. Then it was another whole other world to hold a ceremony for 20 or 30 people. And so to be able to handle all of those different kinds of energies that come out in ceremony and not be overwhelmed by them while also sharing in the visionary space, being able to navigate in that space, requires significant training. And so the plants teach you how to do that. And so it's really just a focus of either healing or learning, and learning has within it the various skills that you need necessary to be able to facilitate and be a conduit of healing for others. I think it's very different to understand that the traditional healing practices are more like being trained as a doctor, and the modern concept of a facilitator is more like a person who's just holding space and letting the plants do what they do. So in the Amazon, the practitioners have a very integrated role in the ceremonies themselves, which is part of the learning process. So you're not just serving the plants and then holding a positive intention, but you're actually guiding the ceremony for hours. And so you have to learn all of the skills necessary to be able to guide a ceremony for hours. Part of it's holding space. Part of it are the icaros. The icaros can take a long time to ultimately receive and learn. And it's not memorizing. It's not through memorization. So you actually have to go through the purification processes and the communion with the different kinds of plants to be able to receive the icaros. So training requires a extensive period of time in the medicine to be able to shift consciousness in a way that allows the learning of the icaros. Then you have to learn how to use them. It's not a playlist. You're not a DJ. You're not just singing songs. So you have to learn how to actually use the icaros to be able to perform traditional healing methods. And so that's ultimately what you learn.
Yeah, so that distinction that you brought up is really interesting between how, in the indigenous ways of using these medicines, especially with ayahuasca, people actually take on the role of doctor and people are like very involved in the journey. Whereas like the space holder, which I think is what more people will be involved in with the psychedelic renaissance, the space holder is actually not that. And it feels to me like it's actually important that they are not that in a lot of settings. Like I've been in ceremonies where I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt like this person's role was to just hold the space, but they got very involved with the ceremony to the point where it felt like they were disturbing everyone else's journey, and their own shit was basically, getting involved unnecessarily. Why is it necessary with ayahuasca specifically for people to, I don't want to say play the doctor role, but be the doctor versus, in the psychedelic therapy or general space holding setting, someone would just hold that space?
Well, I think it's really a specific differentiation in kind of the purpose of the ceremonies itself. So it's really specific. I mean, it's very specific. If you use Western medicine as an example, it's like the difference between a very specific kind of surgeon or going in and having kind of group therapy. Group therapy is a thing where somebody sits and lets people share their stories and kind of talk and hang out. And it's a facilitated role. It's trained, but it's not the same as like learning how to do brain surgery or learning how to do heart surgery. So in the case of Amazonian healers, the plant medicine doctors, they're healing people of very specific illnesses in societies that don't have other kinds of doctors. So it's a different role. And the purpose behind it is obviously a very different intention. People are not going to ayahuasca in the Amazon traditionally to have a spiritual awakening experience and to have a psychedelic experience. They're going to heal illnesses. And so if you have somebody in your ceremony that has a gastrointestinal illness and you're going to heal that illness with ayahuasca and you're going to ultimately heal it mostly through icaros, you have to know which icaros are the icaros that you have that can heal gastrointestinal illness. Then if you have somebody there who's suffered real trauma and they have a kind of illness like susto, where now for some reason they have the symptoms that look very much like PTSD, you have to be able to use other kinds of medicine forms to be able to guide ayahuasca to heal that. And if you just gave them ayahuasca and sat as a sitter, the person with the gastrointestinal illness would not heal, and the person with the susto would not heal. Just fact of the matter is they won't. They would come out the next day and they would have had a psychedelic experience, but they would not have experienced the healing that they were looking for those specific illnesses. So I think in the case of certain psychedelics, there are healing intentions and rationale, and there are healing purposes that can be fulfilled by sitters and facilitators who are really letting the plants do what they do. And then there are other kinds of healings that take place that are not as common, and they absolutely require the necessity of a practitioner who knows how to heal those kinds of illnesses. And so I think that's really the difference. In the psychedelic renaissance, I think most people are going to be looking for an experience where they just need set and setting. They need to have the mindset of being there for healing and an awakening experience. And they need the area to be safe and protected, of high integrity and professionalism. And so I really do agree that more people in life are going to be part of what will be a whole, coming evolution of facilitators. And you'll go from the clinical side of facilitation, which looks like psychedelic assisted therapy, which is a very clinical environment, all the way to the more traditional kind of experience of a group gathering, having the psychedelic experience and receiving the plants for a kind of more general concept of healing. And I don't think one's right or wrong. I don't think one's better or worse than the other. I think it's case specific. And so you can be introduced to these kinds of visionary experiences. Most important is safety and professionalism around the container that's being held, the group of people that are there. And I do believe, like you said, that the facilitation aspect of it is really more a setup of the situation and then letting the plants work. And the situation around ayahuasca and healers who really know what they're doing is that they guide and direct that ceremony. Now, that being said, most of the time, a healer in an ayahuasca ceremony, an ayahuasquero, is holding space for everybody and interjecting through the icaros. So they're not getting up and going and disturbing people's experiences. They're not going and touching their bodies. They're not going and interjecting and talking to them. They're not going and whispering intentions into their ears. They're not doing those things that you see in other places. They're sitting in their chair at the head of the ceremony, and they're guiding the ceremony through their consciousness and through their visions and through the instruments that they play, the sounds and the vibrations that they create. So I think that's a very important distinction for people who haven't had this experience. Only in very rare occasions when somebody is having real affliction does the shaman get up and go to them. And they rarely touch them in any kind of way. So most of the time they'll play a shakapa instrument over their body, around them. They will make sounds around the body of the person to help shift the vibration and the kind of trance and experience that that person is having, but they don't go and disrupt and interject into that person's experience unless it's absolutely necessary.
Could you give an example of, from your subjective experience, if someone is dealing with depression, for example, and you are leading that ceremony and you are singing the icaros, like, are you singing the icaros for the specific people in that ceremony and what they're dealing with? Like, do you tailor the songs to those people, and do you tailor the songs to what's happening in the moment? Or is it like before the ceremony, okay, we're going to sing this and this and this, and then we're going to sing that? You know what I mean? Or is it more of like a live experience?
No, it's live in real time, and that's what takes so long to learn. So in the live real time aspect of it, like I said, it's not a playlist. You learn icaros like skills that you have. They're tools. And so imagine you have a bunch of tools and you go into a ceremony, you have those tools, the tools will be needed, but you have to actually have the rationale and the reason behind those tools to be used. A reason in the ceremony has to manifest. So there are icaros for opening the ceremony. There are icaros for bringing the visionary effects to the ayahuasca, to cleanse, to heal. Different plants have individualized icaros, and you only use them when somebody needs that kind of energy. The icaro replaces the need to drink the plant itself in the ceremony, so you don't have to ingest it, because when you're in the ayahuasca visionary state, you can connect with the essence of the plants through the icaro. They change the context, patterns, shapes, and colors of the visions themselves. And so you'll have icaros that hold the space while you also you actually channel the icaro and the energy through the room to individuals. So you have more collective ones, you have individual channels to support people in their needs. And specifically the case of depression, you have to open up their timeline to get them back to before the rationale for the depression in the first place. That could go all the way back to being in utero based on the experience of the mother and the state of consciousness that the mother's in, and then the formation of the body itself. You have to be able to open up the entirety of their timeline. You have to get medicine into it, which would actually, those are energies, not the plants themselves. You have to bring in the energies that can help somebody go through a recapitulation of their entire life. You have to purge out all of the false beliefs and negativities that are associated to the depression in the first place. You have to ultimately create a very neuroplastic event in the brain and then create a new neural network, which is no longer one based in depression. That can happen in a very short number of ceremonies, like 2, 3, 4, 5 ceremonies. But if you do that in a very short period of time, somebody goes through all of that in that period of time. And so it's an incredibly in-depth, very intense period of healing. So when people say like one ayahuasca ceremony can be like 10 years of psychotherapy, it can be, but that person went through the equivalent of 10 years of psychotherapy in one night. And so as the facilitator, you have to be able to open up the space for that and guide and direct each one of those individual experiences through the icaro. It's not a playlist in that sense. So you have the skills, you've learned them over years and years of training and learning how to use them. And then you can guide and facilitate the ceremony in real time. You never know what's going to happen in the ceremony. And so you have to be aware of what's going on. And then you are constantly scanning the room to understand what's going on. And then the icaros are a tool to help facilitate how to carry the ceremony into its next phase. And that'll be continuous through the ayahuasca journey.
So what is ayahuasca actually doing? Like, how does it allow that process to unfold? How does ayahuasca heal?
That's the great mystery, how ayahuasca heals. Ayahuasca goes into the body and it takes you into an expanded state of consciousness. And then it heals through the transformation of the journey in that state of consciousness. So you go through shifts in consciousness, many sometimes, over and over and over again. And through that process you heal. It's also a purgative. And so as the ayahuasca works through you, if it comes across different kinds of energies in the body that actually need to be removed or come out of the body, then they get removed. A very simple example of that is, from addiction. If you have the residue of different kinds of chemicals, drugs, or alcohol in the body, it'll come out. It'll just come out. If you're going through a detox and a cleansing after having had surgery, the residue of the chemicals that were used in anesthesia and the drugs in ceremony, or the drugs in the surgery, and then the post-care will actually come out of the body. That's a common concept of a purge. So it provides healing through the form of purging. And then there's also tremendous healing in the spiritual reconnection that it creates. There's a fundamental fact to the nature of our spirituality. And when our spirituality isn't in balance with the rest of our life, there's a kind of suffering that gets created there too. And so it naturally can bring that kind of balance back into your life. But it heals through the plant medicines, and it heals through the energetic shifts and changes that it makes in you. So it's like an energy medicine. So it also fundamentally has some really interesting pharmacological components. Like the chemicals in it are really interesting. And they go into the brain, and not only do they help in creating the neuroplastic event, but they also can help balance brain chemistry. So the last 20, 30 years of the study on depression, anxiety, PTSD disorders is that the brain chemistry changes. And so to be able to reset your brain chemistry, rebalance your serotonin levels, increase sensitivity to your own neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, are all incredibly supportive healing qualities associated with the ayahuasca. So all of them combined at the same time is, part of how it works. And there's also a part to it that's quite mystical. And you open up to the universe, and you use intention to ask for healing. And it's been now proven over and over again that the nature has a healing component associated with it. The energy of just the universe itself is a healing component. And there's a kind of restoration of the mind, body, and spirit that takes place.
Yeah, what I found really interesting in my last ceremony was the very clear way in which it felt like the ayahuasca, I don't know if it found it or if it kind of like condensed anxiety that I brought to the ceremony to be healed. It felt like it turned that into a kind of sickness in my body, or it at least made me aware of it as this like sickness. And there was 2 ceremonies. One was on the Friday, one was on the Saturday. And between the Friday and the Saturday, I was sitting with that sickness, and I could feel the stream of thoughts that I usually experience as, me just being anxious. But I could feel them almost like emanating from that feeling, that sick feeling. So I thought it was really interesting how it turned it into something almost like tangible and physical. And then in the next ceremony, I was able to release that. So it's got this amazing ability to purge psychic phenomena as well, not just physical things.
Correct. The psychic phenomena actually gets condensed in the body into something that's physical, and it comes out of the body in a physical means. And that's psychomagical. It's a transference of energy and a transmutation that is not really well explained. But many, many people have had that experience. So I resonate completely with that experience that you're talking about. And I think it's a fundamental, miraculous aspect of ayahuasca that you can go in with psychological difficulty, be aware of it, and have it actually become something that physically comes out of the body. And when it does, after the purge, you can feel a relief from it. And then you can also see that the nature of how the brain and the mind functions is fundamentally shifted and no longer creating the same patterns of darkness or negativity or fear, anxiety, etc.
Yeah, psychomagical is the perfect word. And I've heard someone say before, ayahuasca can heal everything. And we talk about it like this in this magical way, and especially what you're talking about opening to the universe and receiving that healing, and you can almost bring any intention. It feels like you can almost bring any intention as long as it comes from a pure place, is maybe the best way to say it. It feels like ayahuasca can heal. I wouldn't say everything because, there's so many contraindications and people who shouldn't be working with it. But it makes me wonder, like, why don't we all just drink ayahuasca? What's the need for like cognitive behavioral therapy and those kinds of things? I don't believe that should be what happens, but it does raise the question.
In the last 20 years, ayahuasca has become known as a medicine and recognized as a medicine. So one of the reasons why we don't see it all around the world is because it just wasn't there. It wasn't on the global stage until about 20 years ago. It just started to get promoted. When I came down, Blue Morpho was the first healing center dedicated to plant medicine practices. There were other places you could go to drink ayahuasca, but they were introducing the people to an ayahuasca ceremony, like have this experience. We were the first place where people were coming as a natural medicine center to experience, long-term healing, and really focused on ayahuasca as a means to interject in the ways that we're talking about. So it's only been 20 years. If you give it another 20 to 40 years, ayahuasca will be studied by science. If certain other countries will change laws and allow it in medical practices and different kinds of treatment, the use of it will become recognized as a very powerful healing tool for the kinds of illnesses that we've talked about. I agree that you can't say that it heals everything because it fundamentally doesn't. And you say there are a lot of contraindications that people need to be aware of. It's not for everybody for sure, but for what it does well, it's unmatched. There's nothing else like it as a medicine for what it does well. That being said, it's in some ways, like most powerful medicines, dangerous if used inappropriately. And so you have to use it within the context that's safe for it. And there's a traditional context for that will ultimately be understood in the Western way. And I'm actually really impressed that the ayahuasca culture that has formed in the last 20 years has taken that very seriously. So you hear of people talking about the appropriate diet you need to be on when you drink ayahuasca, and coming off other kinds of Western medicines that are contraindicated in the appropriate amount of time. And so I'm really thankful that the global culture has embraced the understanding that the traditional people understood how to use this medicine in a safe way. But it's, I think, really a question, of why we don't see it used ubiquitously around the world yet is simply because it hasn't been studied and accepted legally around the world. But with the interest that there is in it, it will be. And when that happens, you'll see lots of people using it. And I think ultimately it'll be an incredible tool and bring a tremendous amount of healing on the global stage.
For somebody who is considering drinking ayahuasca and who's feeling kind of motivated by this podcast or just previous, times when they've heard about it, but they're not sure, they're kind of teetering on the edge, they're interested, they may be a little bit scared, they may be not sure if it's necessary, like they're not sure if they feel the call, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say, continue living your life and enjoy the most that you can. And if you do have the calling at some point to have the experience, do so. And when you do, really invest in that experience because it's going to be impactful if you do it in a way that's supportive of you. So make sure you have the right set and setting and that you go with people that you feel good about and that are going to be there to really support you through the experience. Prepare for it as well. Give yourself a good, week or 2 weeks of preparation going into it and really take it seriously because it deserves that. You don't have to participate in ceremonies if you don't want to. There's no reason to. You don't have to force yourself to do this. So just live your life if you don't feel called yet. And then when you feel called, embrace it because there's a reason that you have that calling to participate in ceremony. And embrace it when you feel that it's right. If you're apprehensive about it, and that's the part that you're on the fence about, look at the apprehension and see if that's actually what the ceremony is there to address. So often we can have apprehension about something when that thing is the very thing that's going to help us make that next step in our life and move beyond whatever the apprehension is representing. So I saw that all the time at Blue Morpho with people coming for addiction therapy. They wouldn't be scared of the substances that cause the addiction, but they would be tremendously scared of ayahuasca. That was actually going to be the thing that was going to heal them and help them. And so I thought that was an interesting dichotomy. And in understanding that, I would say, well, embrace the fear, because it's the fear that's the obstacle to getting the support and healing and help that you need. So, continue your life journey. And if ayahuasca is ultimately going to be part of it, if you go to the right people, right place for you, it'll be a very positive experience.
Yeah, that's good advice. I know that during COVID, you guys started doing at-home retreats. I'm curious to hear how did that idea come about, and how did that all work out? And are you still doing those?
Yeah, we were teaching different kinds of healing modalities and techniques during COVID. COVID forced Blue Morpho to shut down for the first time in its history. And because of that, we wanted to promote, in the face of so much fear and hysteria that we saw going on the global media space about COVID, we wanted to promote health for people. So it was all this idea about, if you get COVID, what to do. And we thought, well, how do you boost your immune system using medicinal plants? How do you stay healthy when you're in quarantine? What can you do for your mental health and well-being when now you've been, basically shut up inside and you have to stay there? So all of those ideas were ways to reach people with the idea of more non-psychoactive plants, not so much psychoactive plants, but the non-psychoactive plants that are readily available around the world and that could be ultimately purchased if needed, if you didn't just already have them in your kitchen. We wanted to provide the dieta experience. So the dietas are ways that we heal illness that you don't heal with ayahuasca. The dietas are a powerful fast that you go on for a period of time. It's a body cleanse, it's a mind reset, and then we would use ceremonies and breath work to be able to create the ecstatic state or an altered state. And if people had other kinds of psychoactive plants, they could use them during the ceremonies themselves. So we walked somebody in 3 days through what would be sort of a shortened dieta period to go through a physical cleanse with the dieta and learn how to use other kinds of medicinal plants, very much like garlic and ginger and white onion and rosemary and thyme and basil, as well as cat's claw and just a variety, really upwards of more than 50 different kinds of medicinal plants to support people through that period of time. And I had always been interested in using the sort of technology webs as a way of just connecting with people around the plant medicine experiences and how to be able to convey information and collective group experiences, even if we weren't able to all come to the Amazon together to have this experience. And so it just made sense that we could move the retreat experience online, and we could use certain online apps and tools to unite our community and ultimately support everybody in just a healthier experience through what was a very difficult time.
And so those experiences compared to, usually when people come to the Amazon and they do some form of dieta, from what I've heard, I haven't done one myself, but it's usually very challenging. I think there's often like ayahuasca ceremonies in between as well. Yeah, I'm curious what the experience of these at-home dietas were like. Were they like pushing people to the edge? Were people like purging at any point, or was it just nourishing for your physical system largely?
No, the ceremonies can be very intense, and people had purging and people had real transformation associated with the fasting. The combination of fasting can make you very sensitive, and then we teach you how to communicate with the plants so that the plants work on the healing that you need. And when you set the intention to go into a healing experience in the form of dieta, the intention is sort of guiding the experience that you're going to have. And so if you're looking for healing, which could require purging could happen. If you're looking for healing that is a certain kind of straightening of your just mental states, you'll also go through the process associated with it. The breath work alone for many people can be quite intense. And so there was all the different kinds of experiences that we would expect. Not everybody had as intensive an experience. It wasn't about the intensity that we were trying to promote, but rather the knowledge transfer and the ability to just really boost health and immune system and stay really healthy during the experience. So there are lots of, there's, a lot of sort of group experience and activities that we would do during the dieta so that people would communicate with each other, share what was going on with them, experience the communion of being together, even though we were isolated in different parts of the world. And all of that adds up to being a very impactful experience. And we still offer the retreat. Right now, we have it in the video form on bluemorphoretreats.world. People can check it out and do it on their own through the videos that we created out of the retreat. So people can do dieta from their home and learn all about it and have those experiences.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll include a link in the show notes to that. That sounds really cool. Definitely going to check that out after this. Last question here. So Blue Morpho is opening back up to in-person retreats now, correct?
Yeah, Blue Morpho actually has its first retreat next week. Yeah, it's really exciting to be able to be open again. Yeah.
Good for you guys. What's exciting you most about Blue Morpho at the moment and where it might be going?
I think the most exciting thing is that the community, the global community around all of this has grown tremendously in the last years. And Blue Morpho has an opportunity once again to host retreats and share medicine with others around the world. But it's also an opportunity to really embrace that global community that's forming and share in this renaissance that's taking place. It's exciting to think that the plants have a place now on the global stage and that people are really caring about them. So when I started, very few people were interested or even knew the words or names of these things, or they were kind of scoffed at, or, jokes were made or whatever about tripping and things like that. So to really see the plant medicines be taken seriously, to see them becoming more mainstream, it's an incredible thing. And so to be part of that with Blue Morpho and to be able to share what we're doing on the global platform and really help support and educate the community around it, I think is an incredible honor. And ceremonies themselves are just incredible. So to be in the ceremonial space again, doing that work with everybody is just a tremendous joy. It's also an incredible honor. But it's really, I think, most exciting to see so much interest around the world for the plant medicines and to be able to be part of that.
Awesome. I've only heard really, really positive reviews about Blue Morpho, so it's definitely on my bucket list. Is there anything else that you want to say or talk about before we close?
Just, to reiterate that if you feel the calling, embrace it. And the plant medicines are there to be able to support your growth and development. And they provide an incredible cleanse. The various kinds you'll hear in the community, a lot of people who think that, it's one kind of medicine or another, but really it's all of them. They're part of a group or a pantheon of tools that we have to be able to support our mental health and well-being, to be able to learn, to be able to expand consciousness and continue to awaken not only ourselves, but everybody else that we interact with after having these experiences. And embrace it as it comes to you. Be responsible, look for safety and care as you go through these experiences. And, ultimately you'll have a positive outcome associated with this. Set and settings, obviously very important, but also the location, the facilitators, the people that you're interacting with. So take that seriously. And of course, if you're interested in coming on a Blue Morpho retreat, please do. It's incredible to be able to be open again and sharing this medicine once again with the world.
Awesome, Hamilton. Thank you so much for this interview. Much, much appreciated.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, come and find us at bluemorphotours.com. And thank you so much, Nick, for letting me on the podcast. And I look forward to talking with you again in the future.